Welcome to Insights. I'm Dick Goldberg, and today we're going to walk in the shoes of two ministers. What's the experience of ministry like in a small church or a large one from their viewpoint? How is it different than what we might imagine as churchgoers, or even not? What are the rewards? What are the problems? And how is it changing? With us today to talk about this is Tisha Brown. For the last 9 years, she has been the pastor at the Community of Hope, a United Church of Christ. There's 100 members there. It's a small church. And also with us is Pastor Scot Sorenson. He's the minister of a large church, Bethel Lutheran Church, with over 5,000 members in Madison, Wisconsin. For the past 28 years before that position, he served in 4 other churches, 2 of them in Texas, 2 in California, with sizes both big and small. Thanks for joining us.
Good to be here.
Thank you.
First question requires a stroll down memory lane. When you signed on for this career, what were you expecting it would be like? Why did you do it?
As we look at each other. I'll go first. I actually made the decision to go into the ministry in high school. Late in high school. However, I did not share that information with others. But it was really more an influence of family friends. We had a family friend who was a doctor, a family friend who was a pastor, our parish pastor, and I was interested in both of those careers. I thought I had gifts for both of them, and just made the decision that that's where I thought my gifts could be used. So I kind of signed on because I thought that's what I might be good at.
What were those gifts?
Study was involved to be a pastor, so I was a good student. Public speaking was one, and a sense of faith and calling was part of that.
A belief in?
A belief not only in Jesus and God, but a belief that I was being called into that position of service.
A little nosy, but how do you know that?
How do you know that? 2 things. One, it's both an inner sense of that this is where I should be, and the second is that other people said you'd be good in this. So the combination of others and self was the confirmation.
That's nice. Tisha, I have a feeling you have a different story. Why do I think that? Is yours the same story?
Not exactly the same story. I grew up in the church, a variety of different denominations. We were a church-going family my whole life. And when I was a student at the University of Wisconsin here in Madison, I was attending an ecumenical campus ministry on campus, and it was my last year of school, and I was thinking, what am I going to do next? And there was a seminary intern there. Her name was Sylvia. And my mother had died 5 years before that time. And so I was really struggling with being a young woman going out into the world and really missing having my mother around. And Sylvia sort of came in as the seminary intern and really took me under her wing. And we met every week for the entire academic year and read scripture and sang. And she just really was such an important mentor and presence in my life during that time. That was the first time that I sort of wondered whether or not pastoral ministry would be a particular calling for me. But I felt like I was too young and too messed up, just to be blunt about it, I didn't want to foist myself on any poor, unsuspecting congregation. So I kind of tucked that idea away, and proceeded to cobble together various odd jobs, and then decided to do a year as a VISTA volunteer. It's Volunteers in Service to America. That took me out to Sacramento, California. In Sacramento, I attended a United Church of Christ congregation in Sacramento, where the pastor and his spouse, who were both ordained ministers, really nurtured and encouraged me into ministry. They called that gift, the gifts, out in me one Sunday morning.
If I may interrupt, I'm hearing a lot of other people got you into this.
Yeah.
What is it about you that got you into this?
I think really for me it was this sense of Sylvia's influence in my life and thinking I could be that kind of a person in other people's lives. I could be a guide, a mentor, a presence, a listening ear, someone who interprets the gospel in a way that's relevant for our daily lives.
That's a very different path than Scott's, it sounds like.
We're different people, so that makes sense.
Well, I thought, my intuition was you'd have a different explanation.
Yeah.
So I'm hearing in you kind of this wanting to help those individuals and minister.
Yeah.
How is the actual job, career, different from that expectation?
Oh, it's a lot more administration and sitting in front of a computer screen and sending emails than what I had anticipated. And people have really busy lives, and church is just one of the many things that people do in their lives. And I think as a person who goes into the ministry, you're a person, usually, not always, for whom the church is a central focus.
Sure.
And it's that's not necessarily true for the people in your congregation. For some, but not for all of them by any means. And so it's just different. You know,
But more time in administration and sort of like running a small business kind of thing?
For sure.
Wow.
Yeah.
How much more time? What, in terms of percentage of your time, how much are you devoting to the stuff it doesn't sound like you love or your heart's at?
I try to do less of it every year, but probably at least half of my time is spent doing that.
Darn, I'm sorry. Scott, how's it turned out different for you?
Let's see, different for me
than your expectation.
Well, part of the expectation has changed in that, in the 70s when I was in high school, it was really still the era, if I'll use the word Christendom, that sense of the culture helping the Christian church to the exclusion of other communities here. The culture kind of created Christians. The culture had, we had Christmas plays in elementary school, and we had all sorts of pieces like that. And that era is over. It was this 1800-year run. It was a good run.
Oh, you mean where things were not as secular, where things were America was Christian?
Yeah, I would never think that America was Christian. Those wouldn't be my words. But there was certainly an aid from American culture towards the church.
What is that? That's interesting to me. What does that mean? That there would be a bias to making everything as, by church you mean Christian church?
Yeah, the Christian church, that there is a certain bias that nothing was scheduled on Sunday mornings. And all of a sudden, as that changed, then church-going Christians were all upset, and they never put it in their heads going, well, the culture never made accommodations for our Jewish brothers and sisters because there was always stuff on Friday. And it never made accommodation for our Muslim brothers and sisters because there was always stuff on Saturday. So we were caught going, well, we don't know how to play the game when everything wasn't tilted towards our end of the field.
Is this like stores start opening and activities
Stores, activities, sports.
The mall.
Everything going on.
Yeah.
So over my 3 decades, Christendom has ended, and so some of the expectations of what is required of a parish these days is not what it was in the 50s and 60s, and my professors in seminary were children of that era.
Oh. So what does that mean day-to-day operationally for you as a
Day-to-day
minister?
operation means that before the mission when you talked about mission, you were talking about going to Japan or going to Africa or going to China, but going somewhere else was what it meant to be in mission.
Oh, is that to cultivate other Christians?
Yeah, to grow other Christians. Now we understand that mission field is the front door. That we are, just like the very early Christian church that we read about in the Bible, we are now in this wonderful era of a wonderfully pluralistic age where we have to make good arguments for the faith, where we are all out in mission and we can't let somebody else do it. So the focus isn't on, the church is going to take care of that and somebody else's responsibility for creating Christian community and teaching the faith. It was somebody else's job before, 30, 40, 50 years ago. Now, the church has to take that very seriously, and my job is to really cast the vision and change the culture and the adaptive change of the members that, oh, it's my role to be a welcoming presence. It's my role to form Christian community. It's my role to do that. I can't outsource that.
Do you mean they came to you, Christians, lock, stock, and barrel? Now you have to...
Now you got to make them.
Make them Christians.
Yeah.
Harder job?
Harder job, but really more challenging, more exciting. People come with much more interesting backgrounds than everybody looking alike.
Does this ring a bell at all for you?
Absolutely, absolutely. I was born in 1970, so some of what Scott's describing has been my growing up years. The church has been shifting and changing my whole life, and I sort of have felt like the institutional church hasn't adapted quickly enough to some of the ways that things have changed in the wider culture. So that's been a challenge as a pastor to sort of grow up in a swiftly changing culture and then almost take a step back in a way.
Well, okay, if it's up to you, what changes should have been done? It sounds like you think they could have done it faster, better.
Yeah, I think it's just sort of waking up faster to the reality of what, that the culture had changed and the church sort of was acting like that everything was the same.
Can you be specific?
Oh, gosh. Okay, so for one example, the board and committee structure of a congregation, and this is part of also sort of the way the church accommodated itself to modern culture and modern business practices, especially the mainline church. I can't speak for our evangelical brothers and sisters, but the mainline sort of bought into the idea of modern culture. So we had a really complex board structure that involved a lot of people in the management of the institution of the church. And one of the things that I did when I started at Community of Hope was I started thinking about which boards and committees could we stop staffing, like which things were essential for the current life of the church and which things were no longer essential. So you needed to streamline. We needed to streamline. We needed to give people opportunities to be shaped and transformed in faith and not be running an institution.
Wow.
I would, I'm proud of when I was in Sacramento. I killed almost every committee, not all of them, but I was able to get rid of them. And there's a generational change there too. Truly, the builder generation, for them, church serving on a board or a committee is church work. Boomers, they're kind of caught in the middle, but certainly baby busters and millennial, those generations, they want to express their faith by doing something.
What do you mean by doing?
Doing something that of significance. It could be any way that they feel that they can serve their community or serve humanity. It could be learning about other cultures. It could be a year as a Vista volunteer. It could be... But
this is not committee work or board work.
It is nothing to do with committees or board. Just let me go and arrange it so I can go spend 4 hours at the food bank and just work at the food bank, or arrange it so I can go, go and spend a morning working with Habitat for Humanity. Don't tell me how that happened. Just...
Okay, so they want to be more involved in the core spiritual, religious, personal versus bureaucratic.
Absolutely.
Correct.
And experiences of the sacred and the holy in relationship with other people.
Wow.
And perhaps also in worship. And definitely also in worship.
Well, let me ask them. Why would people in the 50s, 60s, 70s want to do board work and committee work? Is it that they realized they didn't have to anymore, or that they wanted to do this stuff and then they changed?
It was what it meant to do church work was to serve on the board, serve on the committees, and it was a 20 and 30-year commitment for folks. And bless their heart, they're committed Christians and passionate about what they do, but that's how they expressed it. But the focus was never on that there was a mission outside the doors. It was rather internally focused.
It sounds like from what you're saying, the church got better. that now it's more of an enriching experience versus bureaucratic for parishioners?
I don't know that I would say better. I just think it's different.
Oh.
I think that different generations have different expectations and have different senses of what feels holy and sacred. I really believe that the people of my congregation, Community of Hope, was a new church in 1967, and there are still some members that founded that congregation that are very active, and they are incredibly faithful people with a really deep sense of personal faith and spirituality. They expressed that through their love for the church by being faithful board members, and by instituting programs and
so
having.
How they expressed that.
It was how they expressed their faith was different.
Let me ask you this: you've got several responsibilities as a minister. Let me list 5 because I'm going to want you to tell me where you spend most of your time. There's the Good Sunday service. There's the listening to individual members and ministering to them. Staying solvent, money, making sure your church doesn't go broke. Creating community among members so they feel they're in a warm, good community. And then there's social justice that you were mentioning, Scott, serving the people who aren't doing so well. Where is your number one responsibility, your most time, how do you prioritize that?
I'll go first. And because I did an 8-day time log recently, so I saw some of that. Well, one is certainly not as much time, but certainly as much energy is our weekend worship services. While I have a number of staff people involved and to make that work, it is the number one connect point for folks. So it's the major point we have to connect with people. Both members and newcomers and guests, and even in the wider community. So time and attention, not just to sermons, but every aspect of a worship service is crucial.
Am I guessing that's what gets people in the tent?
It certainly is.
Forgive my crudity there.
No, and that's why, at my congregation at Bethel, we've been we've had a TV broadcast of our worship service for 40 years throughout the state of Wisconsin, and now been streamed for many years. So that's one of the ways that we connect with people and provide that service. So that's a crucial one.
If you don't have a good Sunday service, if it's not something
nothing else will work.
Yeah,
all those other things will not matter. Paying attention to matters of administration. My time is with staff and key lay leaders, is where the bulk of my time is spent. And that's kind of the different in size so those will be my key folks. And issues of stewardship, that's vital, but it needs to be woven into the fabric of everything. And as well as issues...
Stewardship, for those who might know, is money.
Yeah, stewardship, dollars, how, keeping the business running.
Yeah.
And issues of social justice you need to create opportunities and keep it in front of people. But the number one thing, the Sunday worship, but if the Sunday worship is done well, issues of stewardship and money, issues of Christian community, issues of social justice all come together at that focal point, and then it could be the hub of the wheel that those other spokes can go out and be healthy from.
Well, I hate to give you a clean-up batter here, but how does your experience fit with that?
It's very similar. I think especially for a smaller congregation, worship is just about the only thing we do. I mean, that's not entirely true, but when you have 100 people and more than half of them are in church on Sunday mornings, we really try to do a lot of what's important about the life of the faith community on Sunday morning. I think that it's the way that I sort of view that Sunday morning worship service as a launching pad for people to go back out into their lives. I believe that people are living or have the potential to live their faith in every aspect of everything that they do. So we talk a lot in worship about living your faith, being a faithful person at work, being a faithful person in your community, in your neighborhood, in your family. So I really do spend the vast majority of my time and energy thinking about how to shape meaningful worship services that will engage people and give them something to think about, that will nurture them for the week ahead. And then other ways, I personally don't do a whole lot with social justice. We have an incredibly active congregation full of people that are involved in way more things than I could ever imagine. And so
through the church or on their own?
Through the church and on their own. But I'm starting to erase those barriers in my mind. If someone's serving on the library board, the Dane County Library Board, that's service through the church, you know what I mean? So I'm trying to really erase some of that. I do personally serve on the board of an organization in Madison called Dane County United. Mm-hmm. That's sort of my one. It's a broad-based community organizing group.
Well, let me ask you this: do you prepare a sermon for every Sunday service?
I don't preach every Sunday.
Okay.
I preach most Sundays.
But you've been doing this for 9 years, and you for 30. And I assume you prepare sermons.
Yes.
How do you keep turning them out over and over? I don't get it.
I actually haven't found it to be that difficult. Maybe because I don't preach every Sunday, there are a lot of people in my community that want to share their perspectives and opinions, so I have a very open pulpit. But I also have found my third trip through the lectionary, which is the 3-year cycle of scripture readings that many churches, but not all use. So this is my third trip through the lectionary, and I have found that life changes so much, that what I hear and read and think about in relation to the scripture texts is totally different from...
And how long does it take you to prepare a sermon?
Oh, I probably spend, 10 to 12 hours a week.
Not bad. How about for you, Scott? How's that continual experience?
There are... it is always the merging of the text and the situation that's happening now. You couldn't very well speak without a recent, the recent tragedy over near Milwaukee. Well, certainly that becomes a topic, or whatever.
Mass murder.
Yeah, whatever topic is going on. How does the text address that? And the other thing is now, as opposed to 30 years ago, all my resources would have been in things called books. Remember those?
Yes.
Big, heavy things on shelves. And now most of those books are available through wonderful Bible study resources, illustrations, sermon resources online. And I share with some colleagues at my previous seminary, as well as with some other colleagues, and I, look around and we get gleanings and friends who have other things that they've written, and we share information back and forth.
Well, why not just take one of the best sermons they ever gave and you give it, and vice versa?
Well, I look at some of their pieces and I will quote a paragraph or two out of there.
But let me ask you, your parishioners have never heard John Smith's great sermon in Denver.
Right.
If it's a beautiful sermon and you buy everything he said, why bother writing your own? Why not just read
I
his?
still need to make it mine. I'm happy to quote sections of his and use parts of you going, okay, here I will cite it, but use pieces and then have to put it into my words, because the preaching event, is live between people. But I use lots of other sources, and other people have used me. In fact, early on in my ministry career, I had sermons published precisely so folks could use them.
And they'd quote you. They wouldn't just make. Oh.
Yeah.
Okay, that surprises me. That sounds interesting.
I think another factor why I wouldn't ever do that, I might cite a story or a paragraph like Scott was saying, but I would never take someone else's sermon and preach it because it wouldn't speak to my people necessarily. It doesn't rise out of our particular community, our particular experience, our particular needs. For me, sermons are, I almost never, maybe once, have even preached one of my own sermons more than once, because things change and
sure. In the years you've been in this occupation. What has been the most dramatic change? Maybe you can go back to when you were a consumer of it, since you're younger, Tricia. But what has been the most dramatic change? A hint I hear a lot. People are now consumers, not members. But I don't know if that is one of them.
Can I?
Yeah, go ahead. You've got more experience with. I was thinking, I don't know, nothing's changed. Not enough.
Youth.
I think what you say there is the danger in this consumer society is for congregations to try to be the purveyor of religious goods and services, and they create consumer mentality within their parishioners, and that is not a good way to work. Because if they think they're consumers, then they respond as consumers.
In what way?
In that always our laundry detergent, our cars, everything's got to be newer, better, improved, always something like that. So you've got to do a better Christmas pageant, a better cantata. Every year's got to be bigger and better because you keep raising the bar and you can't go back. Instead of the purveyor of religious goods and services in a consumer society, and Tish was talking about this earlier, that we want to create communities where it is wholly owned and operated by the people who are in that community. They don't consume anything; they are part of the creation of it, and their role is they are the face. For us as Christians, they are the face of Jesus in their world, not so much the 1 hour or 2 hours they're in worship, but the rest of the time, the 167 hours when they are other places.
I take it you also want them to have ownership in the church rather than just be a consumer of services.
Yeah. The church they're just as fully part, my congregation, Bethel Lutheran Church, I want the folks there to understand they're just as fully Bethel, Monday through Saturday, wherever they are, they're fully the church there as we are in that brief time that we are gathered together.
Well, let me ask you both. Do you get frustrated seeing people not living up to your faith because of the trend toward consumerism and feeling like they just buy things rather than they are something?
I try really hard not to get frustrated about that.
But that exists?
It exists. Sure, it exists. And I can understand it. I mean, look at our culture, how people are living their lives, and I can understand wanting to pop in for an hour and get some spiritual juice and pop out and go about, go about the rest of it. I understand. I can really understand that. I think I feel more sad about it maybe than frustrated because I feel like, wow, there's so much richness in the life of a faith community and in the sort of trying to figure out how to be a Christian in the midst of this wild and crazy culture that we live in. There's so much more richness than what a 1 hour worship service on a Sunday morning can offer.
Well, how about on a personal level? Do people still come to their minister with their problems?
Yes.
When they have to.
What do you mean?
I think people in my congregation, and maybe this is just being a smaller church, they will often turn to one another more quickly or to their circle of friends more quickly than they will to me. And when people do call me, it's usually when things have gotten a little bit more chaotic or, are in more of a crisis state than maybe they were a week ago. And they always preface it by saying, I know you're really busy, but... And
do they want spiritual counseling from you, or what do they want?
Yeah, they want spiritual counseling. They want somebody to talk to, certainly, that might have.
How do you handle that when you've got 100 things on your plate and they want you to sit down and be present and spend an hour or two listening?
I try really hard not to have 100 things on my plate so that when those phone calls come, I can sit down and listen and be faithful and attentive. I always tell people this is what I do. This is the thing I love the most. It's really the thing that got me into ministry in the first place was the woman who sat down with me for week after week after week for an entire school year and listened to me and prayed with me and urged me to think about Jesus and my life.
For you, Scott, is personal ministry part of your job?
Well, it's a piece of it. I am very clear with folks that I will be their pastor and not their counselor or their mental health professional. and I will help them find a mental health professional as needed.
Well, aren't there times they don't need that? They just need their minister?
There, but more often than not, the crisis calls, they need a mental health professional and a pastor. And my role is to pray with them and be a referral source and be a support, but not to. Sometimes they come and want me to be their marriage counselor, and I'm not going to do that.
I wasn't trained to do that.
Do they ever come to you and want you to just be their friend?
There are some who do that, and some reach out, and the folks who might be the most critical are the most who also might be the most reaching out, because I didn't. It was real helpful to do some work in family systems therapy to understand that I serve, especially as senior pastor in a large church, become a father figure for a lot of people. And so depending on their relationship with their own family of origin and their parents and their fathers, I'm in that cast in that role, knowingly or unknowingly. And so I need to recognize that when they come to me, it may not be anything about me or the church,
just your role.
But there's other things.
And they say, Pastor Scott, we'd love you to come to dinner on Tuesday night. What do you say?
Actually, those don't come very often. But when they do, I try to make those connections, because it's the best thing to spend an evening around a table with a family. To get to know them.
But they can't get to know you, right? You can't reveal your inner self to them, can you?
I think a lot of that, I don't know what you think, but my understanding of that is that it really depends a lot on the size of the congregation. I started at Community of Hope with very strong ideas about boundaries. I need to stay very private, and I need to have really firm boundaries, and I shouldn't be friends with people in my congregation because that will create jealousies and blah blah blah. And so I think initially kept my personal self pretty guarded around the people of my church, and that didn't work very well for very long.
Really? Why?
Because people want to know their pastor. They want to know who you are. And I think what I've learned too is that my own spiritual journey, my own ongoing engagement with the faith is very helpful and instructive to the people of my community. They see in me their own struggles, their own frustrations, their own uncertainties. So it's important for me to be open, and so it's always a struggle to figure out, is this too much information? Yes. Is this, where is the boundary?
The boundary, I assume, is somewhere short of where the boundary would be if they weren't parishioners.
Sure. Okay. I think there's always an element of reserving some sense of role. I'm playing a role. Regardless of how close I might feel with someone, I'm still playing this role. I've actually, because the congregation is so small, this year I've been having everybody in the church over to my house in small groups. So that's been a really fun way to sort of deal with that we want to know our pastor thing, but also kind of do it on my own terms. So that's been fun.
Let me ask you this. We're kind of running out of time real quickly, but what would surprise people about the experience for you of being a minister? What would people go, I never would have thought that?
Oh, it's fun.
Oh?
I enjoy it most of the time.
That doesn't shock me. I figure you pick something you like.
That doesn't surprise you?
No.
Darn, okay, I'll think of something else.
I think that it might surprise folks how rather ordinary their pastors are.
Oh, really? They put them on a pedestal.
Yeah, and rather ordinary, and have regular family lives, many of them, and have both struggles in the faith, and I think it's important to share those when those come along. My mom died in 2008, and so during her dying process and going through hospice, I shared that with the congregation. I'm usually pretty guarded with personal stories, but that was important to share that. And she literally died the week before Easter, and so that became kind of a focal Easter point in the sermon. So to just share that we're kind of ordinary folks, and the other part that Tisha mentioned about how much time is spent in administration and running the business of the church, that grows even as the church grows. So that part of the job is simply managing a small business.
Well, I have to manage my time. I want to thank you both very much for being with us. It was
Thank you.
Thank you.
very enjoyable, and I hope you'll join us on the next edition of Insights.